Today you will hear the testimony of Nura Saleh, a woman who lived through the impossible. 3 years as a slave in the 21st century in Mauritania, a country where freedom is still a luxury denied to thousands. She was sold, betrayed by the man who had sworn to protect her, and erased as a person. But what no one expected was that her liberation would begin in the most unimaginable way, with a video by Charlie Kirk, secretly watched on a neighbor's cell phone. The debate about faith and truth she saw in that video ignited a flame that neither the desert, nor fear, nor fire could extinguish. Get ready to cross the Sahara with her, to face a storm, and to witness how God transformed a slave into a liberator. And to begin, make sure you are already subscribed. Leave a like and in the comments write the city where you are watching us from, because what is about to happen will shake your faith.
My name is Nura Saleh, and when I close my eyes, I can still smell the desert mixed with the dust of the streets of Tamra, the small village where I was born. The walls of our house were cracked, made of dry clay, and when the wind blew strong, it felt as if the Sahara itself was trying to enter. Life there was simple, harsh, and silent. From childhood, I learned that silence was a form of survival. Noise could attract attention, and attention for a girl was never a good thing. My father, Ahmed Ould Saleh, was a respected cattle trader. It was said that he knew the routes between Mali and Burkina Faso, as well as the lines of his own hand. He carried camels and goats for miles through the sand, and always spoke of the code of honor that every man must uphold. For him, honor meant serving tradition, not truth. And for us women, honor meant obedience. I grew up hearing that a daughter's destiny does not belong to her, that the decisions about her life are made long before she learns to speak. My mother, Aisha, was a strict woman. She taught me everything that, according to her, a woman needed to know to have value, grinding millet until the skin of her hands cracked, weaving mats from strips of palm leaves, cooking without missing the right texture of the dough, and above all, obeying without asking. Obedience was a virtue, and questioning, a sin. Sometimes when I dropped a pot of water or got distracted for a moment, she would say, "Remember, Nura, a woman who does not serve well is good for nothing." I was too young to understand the pain hidden behind those words. Today I know it was fear speaking, fear that I would suffer even more than she had. But there was something in my mother's eyes that I never forgot, a sad glimmer, like someone who knows an inevitable fate. At night, when the fire went out and the wind slipped through the cracks in the wall, she would watch me in silence. Sometimes she seemed about to say something, but she gave up. Only many years later did I understand what that look was trying to warn me about. She knew that soon I would be sold. I was 15 when the hot wind of April brought the man who would change the course of my life. I remember being in the kitchen, helping my mother prepare couscous, when we heard male voices in the yard. It was Yahya Ould Bakai, a salt merchant, 35 years older than me. The sun burned his skin, and his eyes were cold, heavy, as if he were evaluating a product. He did not ask my name. He simply said to my father, "She looks strong. She will give me good sons." The deal was sealed right there. 3 camels, 10 goats, and the promise that I would be raised under his traditions. No one asked what I wanted. In that place, wanting was not part of a woman's life. 3 months later, under the unbearable heat of July, I was given away as a wife. The women of the village painted my hands with henna, sang ancient fertility songs, and said it would be the day of my joy, but inside me there was only emptiness. While they sang, a silent voice whispered deep in my chest, "You were born for something greater." I did not understand what it meant, but it felt like a seed had been planted there, hidden, waiting for the right time to grow. Yahya's house in Tidra was large, made of cement blocks, with a yard full of goats and a deep well from which I drew water every morning. But the size of the walls did not mean freedom. On the contrary, the larger the walls, the more suffocating the silence. Yahya traveled often to the north, and during the periods when he was away, I was under the control of his mother, Khadijetu Mint Brahim, a woman aged by life's harshness, even stricter than my own mother. "A good wife is a blessing from Allah," she would say, as she listed my tasks. Sweep, grind, cook, wash, repeat. The tea had to be prepared in 3 rounds. The first bitter like life, the second sweet like love, and the third gentle like death. I never understood why the last sip had to remind us of the end. For the first 2 years, I lived in a soulless ritual. I woke before sunrise and slept after everyone had gone to bed. I spoke little and dreamed even less. My life was a meaningless repetition. Yahya began to grow irritated because I was not getting pregnant. "Perhaps Allah has closed your womb," he would say with disdain. That was when visits to the marabout became frequent. The old religious leader wrote prayers on pieces of paper, rolled them in leather, and told me to wear them around my neck. He also prepared infusions of roots and bitter leaves that burned my throat. "To open the womb," he said. I drank in silence, but nothing happened. Month after month, hope died a little more, and the house became a field of tension. My mother-in-law watched me as if waiting for a sentence, and my husband grew more and more distant. The daily prayers that once brought me comfort became a mechanical act. I repeated words I did not understand, bent my body toward Mecca, but my heart no longer moved. Sometimes, at night, I would sit by the window and look at the stars. The Sahara wind carried sand that piled up in the cracks, and I wondered, is there something beyond this? Does anyone see me? Then came the change. Yahya decided to move to Nema, a city near the border with Mali. He said it would be better for the salt and spice trade, but for me, it meant leaving behind the little I still knew. I was terrified at the thought of starting over, but what I did not know was that it would be there that my true new beginning would start. Nema was different. The streets were full of life. The market was a whirlwind of colors, voices, and scents. Incense, dried fruits, fabrics from faraway places. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to curiosity. Still, I had no freedom. I went out only under Khadijatu's orders, and even then, under the watchful eyes of neighbors and acquaintances. But those brief outings were all I had. They were my small contact with the real world, the one that existed beyond the walls of my house. The following months were marked by frustration and silence. I still had no children, and Yahya grew colder by the day. The house felt like a tomb where only the wind could breathe. Sometimes I caught myself wondering what I had done wrong, as if my infertility were a curse. On moonless nights, I heard the wind tearing through the desert and thought, if there is a true God, where is he? Does he care? One night, everything changed. Not with a visible miracle, but with something that, at first, seemed insignificant. The neighbor next door installed Wi-Fi. In that poor neighborhood, it was almost a luxury. Curiosity got the best of me. One day, while shopping at the market, a young man lent me an old cell phone, saying he could show me new fabrics online. I had never seen YouTube before. I touched the screen fearfully, as if it were a sin. The images began to move, and for the first time, I saw the world beyond my village. Cities, people, debates, and then, the algorithm, or maybe something much greater, showed me an unfamiliar face. A man speaking in English with French subtitles, Charlie Kirk. The video talked about freedom, morality, and faith. He said that truth is not afraid of being questioned, that God gave us reason and conscience, and that every person has value, not for what they do, but for who they are. Those words crossed the desert inside me like a spark. It was as if someone had finally named what I had felt for years. I, who had always been taught to obey, for the first time wanted to understand. I began searching for more. Each video was a mix of confrontation and hope. I heard about a God who did not demand blind sacrifices but offered grace, a God who saw the heart and set the captives free. As the words echoed, something inside me broke. I asked myself, what if it's true? What if I've been living a lie? On one of those nights, while the wind whistled outside and the desert slept, I spoke for the first time to that unknown God. I did not know how to pray, so I simply whispered, if you are real, speak to me in a way I can understand. It was the most sincere cry of my life. And even without hearing an audible response, something changed in the air. The darkness seemed less dense, the silence less oppressive. In the days that followed, I kept watching in secret, afraid of being caught, but unable to stop. Charlie Kirk spoke about the power of truth in times of censorship, about moral courage, and it made me feel alive. I did not know it yet, but I was about to cross the most dangerous desert of my soul, and every word I heard was preparation for what was coming. With each new video, fear mixed with a hope I could not explain. I began to understand that the cruelest form of slavery is not the one imposed by chains, but the one that settles in the mind, the belief that you have no choice, that your destiny is sealed. For the first time, I refused to accept that. I wanted to know more about the man called Jesus, whom Charlie mentioned with such reverence, and that desire would be the beginning of my break with everything I had ever believed. I did not know it then, but that simple request, "God, speak to me," would be answered in a way that would change my life forever. The desert would never be the same, and neither would I. But before discovering what God had prepared, I would still have to face pain, loss, and fire. That night, the desert wind seemed stronger than ever. The clay walls trembled, and the sound of sand scraping the windows felt like an ancient whisper trying to warn me of something. I was alone, lying on a thin mattress, my heart heavy, and my eyes tired from crying without knowing why. The air was dry, the silence almost sacred, and the only light came from the bluish glow of the small cell phone I hid beneath the blankets. It was my most dangerous secret. On that flickering screen, voices from all over the world crossed paths. And I, a woman who had never chosen her own destiny, found tiny cracks of freedom in stolen seconds. I remember the first video that truly held me. Charlie Kirk was talking about identity and faith, with a conviction that seemed to reach straight through the screen, as if he were speaking directly to me. I did not understand everything. The French and Arabic subtitles moved too fast. But one sentence stayed engraved in me. Truth does not depend on what the world accepts. It remains truth. Those words echoed in my chest like a contained thunder. My breath grew short, and for a moment I felt my heart pounding as if trying to escape my chest. It was not fear. It was something new, a mix of emotion and a strange certainty that something invisible was watching me there in that dark room. I remember pressing the phone against my chest and whispering softly, "God, if you are real, speak to me." And it was as if the air changed its density. A shiver ran through my body from head to toe. Tears began to fall, and I could not stop them. I had not cried like that in years. It was as if my soul, tired of so much silence, was finally breathing again. With every new word I heard, it felt as if a part of the chains that held me began to loosen. Charlie spoke about intrinsic value, about how every person carries a dignity that does not depend on titles, wealth, or approval, who had spent my entire life believing I only had worth if I served, obeyed, and bore children, felt an old wound open. It was painful, but at the same time, freeing. I did not yet know the name of that pain mixed with hope, but now I know it was the Holy Spirit whispering through human lines. I kept watching, trembling with fear and fascination. The video ended, and the algorithm showed me another one. This time, the testimony of a Christian woman speaking about finding peace in the midst of persecution. She spoke with tears in her eyes and said, "When I met Jesus, I realized he did not come to place more burdens on me, but to free me from them. I pressed play and felt my body shiver. It was as if that woman knew my pain, my fears, my silent nights. I did not know what it meant to find Jesus, but I knew I wanted to understand." In the comment section, someone had left a link to a free app, the Bible in Arabic. My heart raced. I hesitated for minutes, maybe hours. Part of me feared what would happen if Yahya found out, but something inside me shouted louder. I tapped the link. The app opened, and on the screen, the words in Arabic shone like gold. Injil al-Mahdi, the Gospel of Matthew. I scrolled with my finger and stopped at chapter 5. The title said, "The Sermon on the Mount." I read slowly, word by word, as someone walking on sacred ground. When I reached the phrase, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," something inside me broke completely. I could not stop reading. Every beatitude seemed written for me. Blessed are those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. It was as if someone were describing my life and, for the first time, saying that there was value in me even within pain. I closed my eyes and cried in silence, holding the phone tightly in my hands. I did not hear any audible voice, but a phrase echoed within me with a clarity impossible to explain. "You are my daughter." It was not a voice from outside. It was something within, a calm, gentle, and steady certainty. I did not understand everything that was happening, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. The dark room seemed brighter, the air lighter. The same blue light that once illuminated my loneliness now seemed to shine from within me. That night, I did not sleep. I spent hours rereading the words of Jesus, trying to understand who he really was, not as a distant prophet, but as someone alive, near. And the more I read, the more I felt a deep peace I had never known. It was as if the fear that had always followed me was beginning to lose its strength. For the first time in years, I did not think about running away, pleasing others, or proving anything. I just stayed there, in silence, feeling the love of a God I did not know, but who seemed to have known me forever. From that night on, something changed within me. The fear did not disappear, but hope began to grow. I knew I had to guard that secret carefully. I deleted the history, hid the app, and kept in my heart what I had read. But Yahya was observant. He noticed details no one else did. His gaze began to change. Sometimes he watched me for long minutes, as if trying to decipher a mystery, and I feared he would see in me the light I was trying to hide. Even so, I continued. Every time I found an opportunity, I returned to the app and read another passage. I memorized verses as one maps out a path to survival. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Those words became my secret refuge. I repeated them silently while washing clothes, grinding grains, pretending to recite prayers that no longer made sense to me. And the more I repeated them, the more I felt a strength growing inside me. A gentle strength, unlike any courage I had ever known. One day, while shopping at the market, something extraordinary happened. I was bargaining over the price of some fabrics when a street vendor, a man with a sun-worn face and kind eyes, approached me. He offered me a small book wrapped in dark cloth. "This is for you, sister," he said in a low voice. "Keep it well. It is precious." My heart almost leapt from my chest. When I touched the book, I felt warmth in my hands. Inside it was written in Arabic, Injil al-Masih, the Gospel of Christ. I could barely speak. The man noticed my astonishment and whispered, "I am from Gao. I have been where you are now. Jesus set me free." Before I could ask more, he disappeared among the stalls. I stood there, the book hidden under my veil, feeling the weight and glory of that moment. That night, I knelt on the floor of my room and said in a trembling voice, "Lord, this is your sign, isn't it? You heard me." It was the seal object I had asked God for without realizing it. In those thin pages, I found the same text I had read in the app, but now it had scent, texture, presence. I hid it inside a handmade cushion, and every night when everyone was asleep, I lit a small oil lamp and read quietly. It was the only living sound in that house. The words of Jesus seemed to breathe with me. The following days became different. I no longer saw my life as before. The suffering was still there, but now it had purpose. I began praying for Yahya and for Khadijetu, not with anger anymore, but with compassion. I asked God to open their eyes, to make them feel the love I was discovering. That was the first transformation I felt. Hatred began to give way to mercy. Strangely, the atmosphere in the house began to change. Yahya started coming back from his trips calmer, and my mother-in-law, although still stern, seemed to speak less. I knew none of this was a coincidence. It was as if the invisible presence I felt when reading the gospel had begun to fill the spaces of the house. There was a silent peace I could not explain, but I also knew it would not last. Yahya's gaze would at times become suspicious again. He saw me smiling to myself, humming softly while cooking, and it irritated him. "What's wrong with you?" he asked one night. "You've been acting different." I simply said I was tired, but he did not believe me. From that moment on, I noticed he watched me more closely. I began hiding the book in different places, afraid it would be discovered. Even so, I could not stop. I needed those words like the body needs air. Sometimes while reading, I felt such a powerful presence that I could not hold back the tears. It was not fear. It was pure love, something no tradition or ritual had ever given me. I understood that Jesus was not just a distant prophet, but a living Savior, and that he saw me even when no one else did. Once, as I finished reading the chapter where he said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you," I realized I was crying in a different way. It was no longer pain. It was gratitude. I had spent years being oppressed, humiliated, treated as an object, and yet somehow, God had chosen me to know his grace. Each night, as I read and prayed, I felt the Spirit of God fill the air of the room. It was as if the blue light from the cell phone had turned into a living flame inside me. Even without understanding everything, I knew I was being transformed. There were no visible miracles, but something deep was happening within me. I felt peace in the midst of oppression and a strength that kept me from hating. That was the first time I realized that a miracle is not only something that happens outside. Sometimes it happens within, in silence, where no one can see. And I was living that. I did not know how much time I had before being discovered, but I knew that what was being planted in me could never be erased. Each day, I felt more alive, even with the same tasks, the same orders, the same meaningless routines. I was no longer the same woman. It was as if I walked invisibly between two worlds, one still bound to tradition, and another illuminated by grace. And in that space between pain and hope, my faith grew. Silent, indestructible, forged in tears and love. I did not know yet, but the time of trials was near. Yahya's gaze would soon grow heavier, and the desert wind would bring not only sand, but fire. But in that season, I was living the beginning of something no one could see, a miracle being born inside an invisible slave. When Yahya decided to move to Attar, I already knew something dark was approaching. He spoke about trade opportunities, but there was a weight in his voice I could not ignore. Attar was known as the rigid heart of tradition, a place where the wind seemed to carry ancient laws, and the gaze of men held more power than any word. As soon as we arrived, I knew my life was about to change for the worse. The houses were silent, and the dry air carried a scent of suspicion. My mother-in-law came to live with us again, and every step I took was watched as if I were a prisoner inside my own skin. I hid my small New Testament sewn inside a pillow, reading in secret during the hours when everyone slept. Those words were the only living flame in my desert, but a secret like that could not remain hidden for long. One night, the sound of the door slamming woke me. Yahya had returned from a trip earlier than expected. I was still reading by the light of an oil lamp, and my heart froze. I tried to hide the book, but it was too late. He entered without warning, and the look he gave me was that of a betrayed man. He lunged forward, ripped the pillow open, and saw what I had so feared he would find. The silence lasted only seconds, but it felt like the weight of a century. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling with fury. I said nothing. He tore the book's cover and shouted, "Who gave you this? Who poisoned you with these lies?" I tried to speak, but his hand came before my words. The blow was sharp. My face burned, the floor spun, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. I could only whisper, "God showed me the truth." Those were the words that set hell on fire. Yahya stormed out, yelling for his mother. Together they dragged me into the courtyard. And there, before the fire, they burned the book that had given me life. The small cross I had hidden was thrown in too. The flames rose high, lighting up the night, and as the pages turned to ash, I felt a strange peace, because I knew they could destroy what was visible, but not what was already written on my heart. After that, the interrogation began. For hours, Yahya tried to extract names, details, places. Who gave you that book? Where did this madness come from? I remained silent, praying inside. I prayed for him, for myself, for all those who would never know true freedom. He thought my silence was fear, but it was faith. 3 days later, I received my sentence. Yahya called me and said, "You will be purified. I will have them teach you to obey again." I was placed in a covered cart, taken by guards, and delivered to the Boubacar family in Nouadhibou. It was a large house, with white walls and iron gates. There, my name was erased. I became the new servant. I was placed under the care of Fatma Mint Sadati, a woman with cold eyes and a voice that sounded like steel. She said to me, "Here, you will learn to be silent." I was taken to the basement. There were no windows, only a small lamp that barely lit the stone floor. The following days were a mixture of hunger, exhaustion, and silence. We woke before sunrise and worked until late into the night. Washing, cooking, cleaning, no rest, no voice. Any mistake, even the smallest one, turned into punishment. Sometimes, Fatma made us kneel for hours until our legs gave out. For 3 long years, I lived in that underground place. The daylight felt like a distant dream. Even so, there was something they could not control. The word within me. I repeated the verses I remembered, whispered prayers while working, and in moments of exhaustion, I felt an invisible presence sustaining me. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Those words became the air I breathed. Then one day, the unexpected happened. The sky changed color, and the wind began to roar like an enraged beast. A sandstorm, a Khamsin, was approaching. Fatma shouted orders. The guards ran to close the gates, but the storm arrived first. Dust everywhere, windows slamming, screams, confusion. Amid the chaos, I saw the gates slightly open. My heart pounded. I felt the impulse. It was now or never. I grabbed a scarf, covered my face, and ran. The wind was so strong it felt like it was pushing my body back, but I kept going. I ran until I could no longer feel my legs, until the world blurred with sand. I fell to my knees, gasping, too weak to move. And at that moment, I saw shadows approaching. A Tuareg caravan, men wrapped in blue robes, riding camels. One of them came near, offered me water, and asked, "What are you doing alone in the desert, woman?" I could barely speak. I only whispered, "I escaped. I need to cross the border." The man's name was Musa Ag Inufa. He looked at me in silence and replied, "The desert is merciless, but God is compassionate. Climb on." I traveled with them for days. The desert seemed endless. Yet inside me there was a peace that made no sense. Musa watched me, curious but respectful. One night, as the wind blew and the fire crackled, he asked, "Where does your strength come from?" I looked at the sky and answered, "From the man who set me free. His name is Jesus." Musa stayed silent, then said, "I have heard that name among travelers. If he gave you this courage, then he must be true." I told him my story, about the videos of Charlie Kirk, about the gospel I found hidden on a cell phone. I told him how each word pulled me out of darkness. Musa listened carefully, and in his eyes, I saw something rare, respect. When the caravan reached the Mali border, he handed me a bottle of water and said, "May the God who set you free lead you safely." Crossing the border felt like walking through a portal. Behind me, slavery. Ahead of me, the unknown. I arrived in the city of Gao, my body weary, but my spirit whole. There, a small NGO took me in. I received a temporary document, shelter, and a modest job at a clinic that served refugee women. For the first time in many years, I heard someone say, "You are safe." It was in Gao that I met the small Christian community. The church was simple, made of wood and canvas, but there I felt heaven open. The pastor's name was Ibrahim Traoré, a man who had also left another faith to follow Christ. When I told him my story, he listened in silence and simply said, "God never wastes pain." The following months were a time of rebuilding. I joined the gatherings, learned to read the Bible more deeply, and understood what forgiveness truly meant. It was not easy. Yahya's face still haunted my dreams, and sometimes I woke up sweating, smelling smoke, but daily prayer began shaping my heart. That forgiveness is not forgetting. It is deciding not to carry the weight of what was done to you. I began helping other women at the shelter. Some were victims of trafficking, others had fled forced marriages. I listened to them, shared my story, and said, "There is a God who sees you, even when the world erases you." Slowly, I realized that the pain that once destroyed me was becoming an instrument of healing for others. But the enemy does not sleep when someone rises. One day, as I left the clinic, a man was watching me from across the street. A chill ran down my spine. Days later, I received an anonymous note. "We know who you are. It's better to forget the past. Fear returned, but faith spoke louder. I was contacted by an international organization investigating networks of servitude in the Sahel. They needed testimonies. I knew the risk. If I spoke, I could be deported. If I stayed silent, many would remain enslaved. I spent the whole night praying. At dawn, the answer came as clear as the sunrise. If the sun has set you free, speak, for your voice is freedom for others. I agreed. Before the hearing, I received letters from Mauritanian women. They had been written in secret and said, "Your testimony sparked hope." I read every word with tears in my eyes. Those women, still enslaved, still invisible, believed my voice could be theirs. On the day of the hearing, my hands trembled, but my soul stood firm. I told everything: the years of slavery, the faith I found, the fire, the escape, the salvation. Every word felt like opening an old wound, but also like letting it finally breathe. Weeks later, the news arrived. 2 links in the servitude network had been dismantled. 2 women were freed. I cried like a child. It was the fulfillment of the promise I had made in the desert, to return for them somehow. But freedom has a price. I had to leave Gao and move to another city, to live quietly. Still, I do not hide from my purpose. I continue helping women, listening to stories, and telling them that the God who set me free is alive, that he began his work with a video by Charlie Kirk and completed it with the gospel of Christ. Today, when I look at the desert within me, I see flowers where there once were ashes, and I know that every tear, every scar, has been transformed into a testimony that true freedom is the one that begins in the heart.
And if this story touched your heart, take a deep breath for a moment and reflect with me. Nura Mint Saleh did not just find a new belief, she found true freedom. From a nameless woman, erased by a system of oppression, she became a living voice that echoes for all those who are still waiting for a miracle. And it all began with a simple video on the internet, something that seemed small, but that God used to ignite a flame that no desert could ever extinguish. What this story shows us is that no one is ever too far to be reached by Jesus. He enters where doors are closed, speaks where silence reigns, and transforms the ashes of the past into eternal purpose. Maybe today you are also fighting in silence, feeling that your voice has lost its strength. But know this, the same God who set Nura free is ready to set you free, wherever you are. If this testimony inspired you, make sure you are already subscribed to this channel. Leave your like and write in the comments, "I love Jesus," so that the whole world will know that this faith still moves hearts and changes destinies. And get ready, because the video now appearing on your screen will take your breath away. It is the story of a former imam who challenged Jesus and saw an impossible miracle happen to his daughter. A real and powerful testimony that will make you see the love of God in a new light. Click and continue this journey of faith with me, because every video here is proof that grace is still writing new stories every day.